It was already past 10:30 p.m. when I slid my key into the lock of my tiny apartment in Asheville. The weekend had drained me. Hosting 24 relatives under one roof for 2 days was exhausting enough, but doing it while keeping every smile polite and every reaction measured? That was warfare in pearls and pot roast. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my tote by the door, and walked straight to the kitchen. My fridge hummed like it knew something I didn't. I opened the banking app on my phone while waiting for the kettle to boil. The balance stared back at me like a slap across the face. $63.71. I blinked, refreshed the screen, closed the app, reopened it. Still $63.71. Less than 48 hours ago, that account had $9,100, carefully saved over months, meant for a surgery deposit I hadn't told anyone about. My hands began to shake. My heartbeat stuttered like it was learning a new rhythm. I sank onto the kitchen stool and dialed the bank, fumbling through security questions with a dry mouth. The recent transactions were all made from a previously logged-in device, the rep said calmly as if she were confirming a salad order. IP address links to an Asus laptop registered to your mother's home network. My blood ran cold. 10 minutes later, I was back behind the wheel, hair still tied in the same tight bun from the reunion dinner, driving through the winding hills back toward my childhood neighborhood. The lights were still on at Mom's place when I pulled into the gravel driveway. Inside, it was all so familiar. Yellowy kitchen light, the smell of chamomile tea, the creak in the hallway floorboard, and the feeling that I no longer belonged here. Celeste, my older sister, was curled on the couch with a glass of red wine, scrolling on her phone like nothing had shifted. "You're back already?" she said, not even looking up. "I checked my account," I said, voice sharp, brittle, almost foreign even to me. Bradley walked out of the kitchen, holding a soda can, leaning against the fridge like it was the most natural pose in the world. "Relax, Tessa. We needed that money more than you did." I froze. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. The air thickened, the room spun slightly, and I felt like my ribs had collapsed inward. Celeste just shrugged. "Don't be so dramatic. You've got a good job. No mortgage. No kids. You'll bounce back." I turned toward the corner of the room where Mom was knitting like a woman in a nursing home commercial. "Did you know?" I asked, barely a whisper. She didn't even pause her stitching. "Tessa, sweetheart, you've always had more than the rest. What's wrong with helping out?" I looked at Dad, hunched in his recliner, phone glowing inches from his face. He didn't meet my eyes. "Don't turn this into a scene," he muttered. "It's family business." A sour taste filled my mouth. "How did you even get into my account?" Celeste flipped her hair. "You used Mom's computer and didn't log out. That's on you." Bradley laughed under his breath. "It's not like we bought a boat. Just rent, groceries, real life stuff." I scanned their faces. No apology, no regret. Just a quiet, entitled dismissal that said we had a right. I stood completely still, my fingers curled into fists. The tea kettle behind me screamed like it understood. Finally, I grabbed my keys from the table, turned toward the door, then paused. "If you think I'm just going to let this go," I said softly, "wait and see." Celeste giggled like I'd made a joke, but she didn't laugh long. The rain started just as I pulled into the empty parking lot of Riverside Grove. It was almost midnight, but I didn't want to go home. Not yet. I needed air, space, something that didn't smell like betrayal and cheap wine. I sat in the car for a while, watching the rain bead on the windshield, each drop echoing the weight in my chest. I opened the banking app again. $63.71. Still there. Still mocking. Still cold. I couldn't say I was entirely surprised. I had just hoped, naively, stupidly, that it wouldn't come to this. A few months ago, I'd turned 52. No celebration. Just a card from the office and an awkward hug from a coworker I barely liked. That night, Celeste called. "Riley's tuition is late again. Can you help? Just this once." I helped. It was never just once. 4 years ago, when Bradley lost his job at the tire shop, I covered their rent for 3 months. "We'll pay you back by spring," he'd said. Spring came and went. So did the money. 6 years before that, when Mom needed dental surgery, I canceled my trip to Oregon and paid up front. She never asked how that felt, only smiled and said, "You're such a good daughter." They called it love. But love doesn't come with a transaction history. In the dim light of my dashboard, I opened my notes app, scrolling through a folder I'd titled Family Stuff. It wasn't neatly organized, just fragments, screenshots, payment confirmations, loan reminders. Every time they needed me, I logged it, not because I was tracking them, but because part of me needed proof that I wasn't imagining it all. The earliest entry? March 3rd, 2010, $92.50, Celeste's phone bill. She'd lost her job that week. I'd just started a new one. She said I was lucky. I agreed. That word followed me for decades. Lucky. Lucky to be healthy. Lucky to live alone. Lucky to have a decent salary. Lucky enough to pay for everything without complaint. It wasn't love. It was duty wrapped in guilt. And they wielded it well. 2 birthdays ago, I bought Riley a bicycle, $250, not including the helmet. When I hesitated, Mom said gently, "You know she looks up to you, right?" This would mean the world. I'd given up so many small joys to feed theirs. No one asked if I was okay skipping vacations, eating ramen for a month to pay for Mom's utility bill, or staying late at work to cover the extra hours I couldn't say no to. They never asked, and I never offered, because I thought that was what good daughters did. But tonight, as the sky wept and I stared at that pitiful $63.71, something broke. Not loudly, not violently, just quietly, like a thread snapping deep in the weave of my chest. I opened a new note, titled it "The Last Time." Then I began to write. Bradley, $900 rent, July 2020. Celeste, $300 for Riley's school trip, February 2022. Mom, $740 dental, August 2016. Groceries, repairs, late-night transfers. Not to ask for it back, not to send it to them, but so I'd never forget, so I'd never allow it again. By Monday morning, I had barely slept. The rain had eased, but the tension inside me hadn't. It clung to my skin like a fever. At 8:10 a.m. sharp, I called the bank again. This time, I asked for a complete transaction report covering the last 10 days. The rep on the other end was polite, efficient, and completely unaware of how personal this was. By noon, I had the file, 17 pages long. I printed every single sheet at the FedEx Center downtown, stapled them together into a fat stack, and bought a red pen. Then I sat at my kitchen table, highlighter in hand, and got to work. Page 4. A withdrawal of $2,874.12 from an IP address traced to my mother's router. Page 6. $350 at Greenleaf Pharmacy, listed under a loyalty account tied to Celeste. Page 9. $119.99 for a child's gaming headset. Riley didn't even need another one. I circled each charge slowly, carefully, like building a map of betrayal. By the time the sun dipped behind the mountains, I had marked over $4,600 in red ink. Tuesday evening, I called Mom and said I'd stop by for roast night. She sounded pleased. That detail cut deeper than I expected. The house smelled like rosemary and familiarity. Celeste was already there, sitting at the head of the table like she owned it. Bradley poured lemonade with the casual arrogance of a man who thought he'd gotten away with it. I didn't waste time. I placed the file on the table, gently like laying down a trap. I reviewed every charge, I said. This account wasn't just accessed. It was systematically drained from this address. No one moved. Mom stirred her salad. Dad rustled his newspaper. Celeste looked at the ceiling like she was searching for divine intervention. "You used Mom's computer," she said finally. It's not like we hacked anything. You left it open. I stared at her. So you admit it? She shrugged. It's not the first time you've helped us. I didn't agree to help you this time. Bradley's soda can hissed as he opened it. You're always so dramatic, Tess. This isn't stealing. It's helping family survive. No, I said, my voice low, steady, final. Helping is when someone asks and the other agrees. This was calculated theft. You waited. You watched. Then you took. Mom looked up at last, her voice soft like lace. Tessa, you live alone. You don't have debts. You don't have a child to raise. Celeste is doing her best. Doing her best doesn't include raiding someone else's account. Dad folded his newspaper. Don't be so harsh. You've always been the strongest one in the family. You know no one else could handle pressure like you do. Don't confuse endurance with consent, I said. Silence. Then, Celeste slammed her fork down. We didn't go shopping with it, okay? It was rent. Riley's asthma meds. The car broke down. You think this was easy for us? I think, I replied, you've been living off the assumption that I'd never say no. The room held its breath. For the first time, I looked at each of them not as family, but as strangers wearing the faces of people I used to trust. Then I opened my purse and pulled out a sealed manila envelope. I'm going to ask you all one last time. Did any of you intend to tell me? Apologize? Return anything? No one spoke. I nodded. Then this is me choosing not to be your safety net anymore. Dad scowled. Celeste opened her mouth, but said nothing. Mom's hands trembled slightly, still resting on her salad bowl. Bradley laughed once, dry and sharp. What are you going to do, Tessa? Call the cops. I looked him dead in the eye. Watch me. Then I turned around and walked out of the house I once called home. This time, I didn't even glance back. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of chilled sunlight that made everything look cleaner than it really was. I got dressed like it was any other day, but instead of heading to the office, I drove downtown to the Buncombe County Financial Crimes Division. The lobby was quiet, sterile, a little too cold. I sat across from a young officer named Detective Quinn, who offered me water and asked for my documentation. I handed her the envelope, marked, color-coded, time-stamped. Receipts, transfers, IP data, screenshots. It was all there. She flipped through the pages, expression unreadable. We'll begin a preliminary investigation under financial fraud and unauthorized access to personal information, she said. I nodded. The individuals are all related to me, I added. That doesn't change anything, does it? Legally, she said, meeting my eyes. No. Theft is theft. When I left the precinct, the clouds were rolling in over the Blue Ridge Mountains. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. 2 weeks later, on a gray, quiet Thursday, I was deep into a Zoom call with a client when my phone began to buzz. I muted myself and stepped onto the balcony. Unknown number. Miss Monroe? This is Detective Quinn. We've completed the preliminary investigation. There's sufficient cause to move forward. The investigative unit will begin visiting each individual today. I didn't speak right away, not because I was surprised, but because relief, real and full, doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it shows up like this. Quiet, steady, final. That evening, while prepping dinner, my phone lit up. Mom. Then Celeste. Then Bradley. I didn't answer. The texts followed. Tessa, what are you doing? Did you really call the police? Call your mother now. You're blowing this out of proportion. I turned the stove off. An hour later, a neighbor messaged, there are 3 people outside your mom's house in financial crimes jackets. They asked about you. I stared at the message for a full minute before setting the phone down. I didn't feel triumphant. I wasn't smiling. What I felt was stillness, the kind that settles after years of being rattled. Friday morning, I arrived at work earlier than usual. In the elevator, I noticed glances, curious, awkward, maybe even sympathetic. My manager, Marcus, caught me in the hallway. Hey, we got a call from a local reporter asking to verify your name in relation to an open financial investigation. He didn't push, just placed a warm hand on my shoulder. We didn't confirm anything, but if you need time, just say the word. I looked at him, calm level. It's okay, I said. I'm doing the right thing. That night, I sat by my window, tea in hand, watching the lights flicker across the apartment complex across the street. Behind some of those windows, I imagined other people like me, quiet givers, just now learning how to say no. My phone buzzed again. A message from Dad. Just one sentence. The bank sent a foreclosure notice. If we don't pay in 30 days, we lose the house. No apology, no regret, just the usual unspoken expectation. Tessa will fix this. She always does. Only this time, she wouldn't. I didn't reply. That evening, as the wind rustled the window panes and dusk crept in, I sat down at my desk and opened the folder I'd been building for years. Tucked inside were emails, bank slips, Venmo screenshots, even text messages from holidays I'd spent transferring money instead of eating pie. Somewhere among those pages, I found my old self, the version who said yes without hesitation, who forgave before an apology ever came. She was tired, but now she was gone, and in her place stood someone else, someone who understood the difference between generosity and survival. By Saturday morning, my phone had become a battleground of notifications. Missed calls, voicemails, texts so long they had to be broken into parts. I let them come. I read none of them. It wasn't silence I craved. It was space. Space between me and the people who had only known how to reach for me when something was broken. Never when I was. At noon, Celeste sent a message that made my stomach tighten. My bank account is frozen. I can't pay Riley's tuition. You win. Are you happy now? You win. As if this were a game. As if the stolen money, the lies, the manipulation, and years of emotional debt were just moves on some cruel board. It didn't end there. That evening, another message arrived, this time from Bradley. It was short, desperate, and painfully transparent. He said he'd been suspended from work, that his employer was reviewing his financial activity, that this could ruin everything. He begged me to say something, to fix it, to stop this before it went too far. He called it a mistake. He called me different from the rest of them. He called it unfair. The same man who once laughed at me in my mother's kitchen, soda can in hand, now begged for mercy as though he'd never held a match to the bridge between us. I didn't reply. The next morning, I woke to yet another message, this time from Mom. Her voice in the voicemail was soft, almost trembling. I know I was wrong, she whispered, but if we lose the house, I don't know how I'll survive. Please don't abandon me. Not a word about what she did, not a whisper of apology, just fear. Fear of losing property, not relationships, not her daughter. I placed the phone face down, poured myself a second cup of coffee, and stood by the window. Outside, a thin fog was rolling over the mountains like a soft curtain pulling across a tired stage. It felt final. For years, I had been the stagehand, setting the table, wiring the money, smoothing over every inconvenience. And now that I'd walked off stage, they were scrambling. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about liberation. Mid-afternoon, I packed a small suitcase, no dramatic note, no social media goodbye, and started driving west. No GPS, just instinct, and the quiet voice inside that said it's time. By Tuesday, I was in Sedona, Arizona, a place I had visited once on a business trip years ago, where red rock canyons met quiet cafes and the silence didn't feel heavy, it felt earned. I found a furnished studio with tall windows and a view of the cliffs. Signed a short lease. Paid in full. Unpacked in under an hour. No one called me that day. And I didn't call anyone either. There were no emergencies, no favors, no guilt trips disguised as conversations. There was only me, the sound of wind across dry stone, and the soft certainty that I had stepped into a life where my value wasn't measured in what I could give away. 3 days later, I woke up at 6 a.m., brewed coffee, and sat at my new desk, sunlight pouring in through the curtains. I opened my laptop, took a deep breath, and began typing a long, detailed strategy report for work. No distractions, no bank alerts, no one asking for just a little help. Just focus, just peace, just Tessa. 2 weeks after settling in Sedona, something strange began to happen. I started sleeping, not the kind of sleep you collapse into after exhaustion, but real rest, the kind where you wake up and don't feel like 1,000 invisible hands are already pulling at your time, your money, your mind. I cleaned the studio slowly, deliberately, one drawer at a time. I bought fresh tulips every Sunday from the tiny market 2 blocks down. I filled vases with them, not because anyone would see, but because I wanted to look at something alive that didn't ask anything of me. And then came the call from Julian. He was my regional director, based out of San Francisco, and we hadn't spoken directly in nearly a year. But that morning, as I sat cross-legged on the balcony in a knit sweater I'd forgotten I owned, my phone rang. "Tessa," he said warmly, "I've been reviewing your recent work. That strategy deck you submitted last week, it's brilliant. Honestly, it's some of the cleanest, most focused thinking we've seen. Have you ever considered stepping into a senior coordinator role? We're restructuring for the West Coast, and I'd like to put your name at the top." There was a time I would have hesitated, would have thought of Mom or Riley or whether I could take on more while still being the emergency fund for everyone else. But that version of me no longer answered the phone. So I said calmly, "Yes, I'm ready." Julian chuckled. "Didn't expect you to hesitate. I'll have HR call you this week. Congratulations, Tessa." When the call ended, I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just smiled. A quiet kind of smile that came from knowing I had finally made a choice with no strings attached. That afternoon, I walked through the canyon trail just behind the apartment complex. The red rocks glowed like embers under the late sun, and for the first time in years, my mind wasn't racing. No grocery lists, no side calculations, no memory of a drained bank account, just breath. The next morning, I returned to a coffee shop I had only visited once before, 5 years ago, on a quick trip through Arizona. I remembered the jazz they played, the honey lavender scones, the old man who sat by the window sketching mountains on yellow paper. Nothing had changed. Even the barista looked vaguely familiar. "You've been here before, haven't you?" she asked, handing me a cappuccino. I nodded. "A long time ago. Just passing through." "Glad you came back," she said. "This place, it keeps the quiet ones." I sat at the same corner table by the window, sipped slowly, and opened the journal I had brought from Asheville. Inside, the pages still held the tally of what had been taken from me. But now I turned to a clean page. I didn't write much, just one line. "This time, everything I build will be mine." That evening, as I curled beneath a blanket with the windows open to the cooling desert air, I read through a few old messages from friends I'd lost touch with, people who had known the lighter versions of me before the giving became constant. Then came something I didn't expect. An email from someone named Melanie. "Hi, Tessa. You probably don't remember me. I'm a cousin on Celeste's husband's side. We only met twice at family gatherings. Once, you drove me home after a birthday party. I never forgot that. I was 16 and too shy to speak. But I remember you." She continued, "I heard what you did. I heard how you stood up and walked away. I've been in a similar place for years, giving, folding, saying yes until I forgot what I wanted. Your story changed something in me. It reminded me that kindness doesn't mean being consumed. Thank you for showing me it's okay to draw a line." I read her words 3 times. Not because they surprised me, but because they felt like sunlight on a scar. Not healing it, not fixing it, but acknowledging it had always been there. I replied simply, "Thank you for saying that. And yes, it's okay to draw the line. In fact, it's necessary. Then I closed the laptop and looked out into the evening light. Somewhere between the red cliffs and the quiet sky, I could feel it, the life I was finally claiming. And for the first time in decades, I felt free. Autumn in Sedona comes quietly. The days shorten just enough for the mornings to feel crisp, for the leaves to dry at the edges and curl like old letters. On a Sunday afternoon, I strolled through the village market, sipping hot cider, wrapped in a wool shawl I hadn't worn since my early 30s. A woman passed by with her daughter, maybe 5 years old, riding a bright pink scooter. "Slow down, sweetheart," she called out, laughing. I paused for a moment. There was something in that moment, a mother's voice, a child's laugh, the wind catching the hem of my scarf, that felt like a painting I could finally walk into. I used to think I had to do everything to be enough for my family. I used to think that love meant sacrifice, meant paying the bill, meant skipping the vacation, meant sitting in silence when I wanted to scream. But now I knew something truer. Love doesn't demand self-erasure. Real family doesn't measure you by your usefulness. A few days later, I hung an abstract painting in my apartment. It didn't match anything. It was bold, chaotic, full of color, exactly what I'd always been taught to avoid. But I loved it, and that was enough. My days settled into a rhythm that belonged only to me. Morning yoga at the community center. Weekly Zoom calls with my team back at work. A pottery class every Saturday where no one knew my last name or what I had walked away from. I planted a tiny herb garden on the balcony. Basil, thyme, lavender. They grew slow and stubborn, like healing. Every so often, I'd receive another message from someone I barely remembered. A co-worker, a second cousin, a friend of a friend. "Tessa, what you did gave me courage." I said no for the first time in years. I set a boundary, and for the first time, I didn't apologize for it. One day, I received a postcard in the mail from a woman named Kelly. She had been a junior assistant at my firm years ago. On the back, she'd written, "You once told me, you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm." I never forgot that. I moved to Florence last month. I'm finally painting again. That postcard now lives on my fridge, next to a photo I took of the canyon at sunrise. 2 reminders: the light can return, and sometimes the things we lose, family, tradition, approval, make space for the things we never dared imagine. I never went back to Asheville. I never returned to the house with the rosemary roast and the soft-spoken betrayals. They still call sometimes. Not as often now. Sometimes it's a silent voicemail. Sometimes it's a long, guilt-laced text. I don't block them. I don't respond either. Not out of spite, but because I finally learned that some doors don't need to be slammed shut to stay closed. They just need to remain unopened. I don't wait for apologies anymore. I don't chase understanding from those who were never willing to see me clearly in the first place. I chase peace. And every time I breathe in this desert air, every time I sip tea with no emergency waiting on the other side, I know I found it. The family I belong to now is one I've built gently over time. People who don't ask me to shrink. People who meet me where I am. People who offer without demand. Sometimes I still miss what used to be, but I don't long for it anymore. Because I finally understand. I didn't lose my family. I found myself, and she was worth everything it cost to get here.